he came back out and he was straight-faced. He said to me, "I've only one piece of advice for you." I said, "What?" He said, "Shut it down."
Wow.
Shut down the business.
Right.
And I couldn't believe it.
Okay.
I said, "What?"
Yeah.
He said, "You can either shut it down now
Mm.
and you'll have some money to do what needs to be done during a shutdown process,
Right.
or you can wait till Christmas and you'll be going out of business anyway, and it'll be a lot more painful for you."
Good God.
I was gobsmacked.
The Guardian Irish Business Podcast is a tour around the entrepreneurial industry here in Dublin and across the country. We have the great privilege here at Guardian of working with some of the most inspiring and influential small businesses in Ireland and the people that run them, who are forming and shaping the future of many different sectors of the Irish economy. I thought it would be interesting to chat to and learn from these people, which we do every day, but memorialise it in a podcast which could then be shared with our friends and clients and you, the listener. Today I'm delighted to have a man who's been involved in the Irish IT industry for the last 40 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Murray. Bob, good morning.
Good morning, Colin. Lovely to meet you again.
Absolutely, and welcome.
Thank you.
So Bob, take us back to the start. 40 years in the IT industry.
It's a long time, Colin, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
I suppose I should kick off by saying 40 years. The IT industry is a young man's game, so I started out when I was 5.
Right.
Just in case people think I'm not as old as I am.
Yeah.
How far back? Do you want me to go back to coming out of college?
Well, coming out of college, Bob, and what did you even the fact there you said you went to college, right?
Yeah,
Which wasn't for everybody 40 years ago.
It wasn't, but I got good insight into a college that we lived near, which trained radio officers, believe it or not, for ships. Every ship at the time needed to have a radio officer in case the ship started sinking. The radio officer was responsible for sending distress signals and things like that. But they were also responsible for keeping all the equipment on the ship operational, the electrical equipment.
Right.
So the training I got as a radio officer introduced me to strategies for maintaining electrical equipment in good functional order. Okay. And it was great. I really enjoyed it. It was a course that took 4 years in Kevin Street, but there was a college in Leeson Park that did it in 2 years.
Right.
It was run by two, well, at the time I was 20, I called them old fellas, but they're probably, I wouldn't call myself an old fella yet, but they were probably younger than I am now. Yeah. They pushed really, really hard and they got the course done in 2 years.
Right.
But by God.
So did you go to Kevin Street or Leeson Park?
Leeson Park.
Okay.
And one of the things that a radio officer can't do, obviously, is crack under pressure.
Right.
Okay. Because the ship is sinking. There's a lot of pressure involved.
Yeah.
But the radio officer has to be able to continue sending the distress signals and think clearly under pressure.
So, Bob, what was that degree or course called?
It was, there was a big convoluted name on it called a marine something or other license to operate as a radio officer in the marine industry.
Okay.
But the aspect of not cracking under pressure became very important in later years.
Very good.
Yeah. So it was good training and I really enjoyed it.
Right.
I went on from that to study radar in Kevin Street, which is further grounding electronics. And then I went on and did a course on computer processing.
Okay. In Kevin Street as well?
That was run by, I think they're called Anco at the time, or Manpower.
Yes.
Up in Parnell Street. Street is it, or square? Near the square, Parnell Street. Yeah. And that was very interesting as well. But from that, then we tried to get work placement. With computer companies.
Right. And where did you end up for your very first job?
I ended up working for a great American computer company called Wang.
Okay.
W-A-N-G.
Okay, yeah. I remember them, yeah.
They were big in office automation back in those days.
I would have been in digital computers about that
time
as well, yeah.
Because it's funny, and you might be able to reaffirm this, the people who started in Wang and the people who worked in digital and the people who worked in IBM kind of stayed together throughout their whole careers.
Correct, yeah.
Did you experience that?
Yes,
Band of brothers, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
But we were all, 20, 21-year-olds working on computers.
Yeah.
And there was a buzz about it. And we worked together, we socialized together, and we all enjoyed it.
And indeed, Bob, I would say to you that those three companies were a great breeding ground for entrepreneurs to go out. I would know many people from digital who set out in their own path and successfully had careers in the IT industry.
That's true,
so, good breeding ground. So,
I think a few spring to mind.
Yeah. So Wang,
yeah. And I had done dozens of interviews with other computer companies, and they all said the same thing to me: we can't give you a job because you don't have any experience.
Right.
So I was so fed up with this by the time I got to my interview in Wang, I almost told the interviewer the way the questions were going to go, and the reason he wasn't going to offer me a job. So what I said to him, I said, before we go through all the questions, I've done the aptitude test, which I passed, but before I go through all the questions, I'm going to save you the bother. I don't have the experience, so you're probably not going to give me a job.
Okay.
So I'll offer to you that I'll work for free for 6 months, just to have the experience.
Okay.
If I do a good job and there's a full-time job at the end of it, happy days. But if you don't want me, I'll move on.
Right.
But at least when I go to my next interview, I'll have that critical 6 months work experience.
And did they take you on?
They did. Yeah.
Right.
I don't think he even interviewed me. He said, we can afford that. Come on.
Okay.
You can start tomorrow.
And did you work for free for 6 months?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, to be fair to him, I think it was about 4 months.
Was that 1985, 86 sort of, or?
That would have been, around that time.
Okay.
85, 86, 87. I stayed there about 3 years, and then I moved to another company to get sales experience in 1988.
So Bob, you made the hard choice to offer your work and time for free to Wang. Have you ever been able to reciprocate that to an applicant?
You can kind of see when you're working in, I suspect it might be the same for every industry, but certainly I'll talk for the IT industry for a moment. You can meet people who you know are just passionate about the business, and they're going to be naturally good IT people, but they mightn't have any qualifications. And actually one chap springs to mind. He was a disaster at passing exams, God help him.
Okay.
He just got stressed by exams.
Right. I can sympathize with him, Bob, having taken 10 years to qualify myself, but I was just distracted by different things.
Well, I don't think, but yeah. Well, this man anyway, he used to get very stressed whenever there was an exam, but by God, was he one of the best engineers I ever came across.
Right.
He was just phenomenal.
Okay.
And from time to time, people come to me and say, he's not a
suitable candidate.
He's not a certified systems engineer.
Okay.
Or even one of the big manufacturers might say, no, we can't have him as part of the team. He's not qualified.
Right.
And I just, and nor is he going to qualify, but I guarantee you he'll be one of your best engineers.
Very good.
So, the IT industry can be tough like that. And we worked very closely for a few years with one of the lecturers in the Kevin Street Institute of Technology.
Okay.
And every year we take in 2 or 3 of their students, not so much to help us in the business, but more to help them find the path that was right for them.
Right.
So I don't mind saying this because one of the other students in Kevin Street, whom we didn't take on, I met him at a fair, and he said to me, everybody in the class hopes they get the Hibernia or the Evros assignment. Because what we used to do is we'd take a chap in and say, what are you interested in?
Right.
What aspect of technology floats your boat, for want of a better word?
Okay.
And they might say security, or they might say networking, or they might say app design or system integration, or just plain old nuts and bolts.
Sure.
And that's where we put them.
Right.
Whatever they were passionate about. And it was quite okay for them to come back to us and say, actually, I'm after spending 2 or 3 months now on networking, and I'm not that impressed with it.
Yes.
I'd like to try my hand at working as a SQL database developer.
Okay.
I say, okay, we'll shift you over there.
Very good.
And at least then when they were emerging out of college, they'd either spent a certain amount of very pertinent work experience working on something they really enjoyed.
Very good.
Or equally good, recognizing that thing they were passionate about, that they aren't that passionate about it after all.
Sure. Very good.
So, yeah, we would have tried to give back over the years.
Very good. Excellent. Bob, 85, 86, remembering my own job at that time, computers weren't to the fore. I mean, this was still early stage of technology in Ireland and Irish business and industry.
Wang were very strong in office automation, and they built huge computer systems that provided word processing to users at the desktop. They got rid of the typewriter,
Right.
and they did it really well.
Okay.
But there were a lot of engineers working for Wang at the time, and they loved working in the big mainframe or mini mainframe type computers.
Okay.
But Wang had developed their own PC, which none of the more experienced engineers wanted to look at.
Okay.
They poo-pooed them
Right.
effectively.
Right.
So I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to have a job in the computer industry, why don't I work on something that nobody else is interested in looking at?
Right.
And gradually, these PCs started proliferating in the marketplace.
Okay.
And the older engineers would come to me whenever there was a problem with a PC in one of their customer sites.
Right.
So it kind of worked.
So you're hands-on on the technical side.
I wasn't qualified as an engineer, but I was classed as an IT engineer.
Okay. From experience.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
So from Wang, how long did you stay there?
I stayed in Wang for about 3 to 4 years.
Okay. And did you then move on to another job and employment, or did you then set up Hibernia?
No, I actually really got to like the PC, and I kind of saw that this is something new now, and it's going to bring
Take
about
off.
a bit of change, and it might just take off. I think when I was leaving Wang, the PC actually had just gotten a color screen.
Right.
And Windows version 1 had been released. Up to that, it was Microsoft DOS, but Windows version 1 had just been released purely to run PageMaker, a desktop publishing application.
Right, okay.
And I looked at this and I said, this is going to go somewhere.
Right. Was PageMaker the predecessor of Word, or was PageMaker...
PageMaker disappeared. It's probably more closely aligned now to the likes of Adobe InDesign or Adobe Illustrator.
Right.
Or there's a few other big publishing type applications.
My memory fails me, but I've certainly heard the name. Okay.
You know the name.
Yeah.
PageMaker. And I kind of had the idea at the back of my mind. Let me go back a bit. I noticed in Wang that there were all these 20-year-old engineers who would work 24 hours a day if they were given the opportunity.
Right.
For very little money, it must be said. But at the same time, I noticed there were other people working there who were probably in their late 30s or early 40s. They didn't understand the technology as well as the engineers. They couldn't keep up. They were expensive. They had families. They had mortgages. They had car leases, and they were getting let go.
Right.
And I felt at that stage, if I'm still working for a computer company when I'm in my early 40s and I get let go, I'm going to have a hard time getting a job again. So I felt at that stage that I'd like to be the person employing people, rather than at the mercy of somebody who might decide that I'm an IT industry dinosaur and need to be moved on.
A bold statement and aspiration when you're late 20s?
Early 20s.
Early 20s, okay.
Yeah. So I knew I could fix computers at that stage, and I had to learn how to sell them.
Right.
So I moved to a company specializing in making third-party peripherals for Wang systems, and I spent about 2 years with them.
Who was that, Bob? They
were called PCL.
PCL, okay.
They were out in Clondalkin.
Sure.
And they had a great product, but the writing was on the wall for Wang at the time. So consequently, the writing was also on the wall for PCL.
Right.
You know.
Again, two history names there, gone. But yet they were the bedrock of Irish IT sector back in the 80s.
Yeah.
Okay.
But although they're not gone, my last assignment with Wang was an on-site engineer for AIB. Okay. And I was based in Bank Centre in Ballsbridge, opposite the RDS.
Right.
And at the time, it was a huge organisation in the Irish marketplace. But I drove past that site the other day, which is obviously being rebuilt, and Facebook are moving in there.
Yes,
And there's a name that didn't exist 15 or 20 years ago.
Correct,
And now they're moving into AIB's old headquarters.
Sure.
So names change in the IT industry pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
And fairly regularly.
So from PCL was your next?
I spent a couple of years with PCL. And I saw the writing on the wall for them, so I decided that was the time to make my move. And in 1990, it would have been 1990, I moved from PCL and I set up Hibernia Services Limited.
And was that on your own, Bob, or had you a person you'd met at the time that was to become your partner? Or
No, I did it on my own. I had
Right.
met a chap that was interested in doing it with me, but he had a wife and children and a mortgage and all those things, and he needed stability.
Right.
So he took a job at another organisation, and I set up Hibernia on my own.
So very good.
I was lucky that I was still living at home,
Right.
so my overheads are quite low.
Very good.
Yeah.
And where was your first office?
My first operating desk was in Ainger Street in the office complex called Whitefriars.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And I was on the top floor of Ainger Street with a desk and a phone.
Very good.
Didn't even have a mobile phone back
Not
in
at
those
all.
days.
No, they didn't exist.
Wasn't exist.
My first mobile phone was a Super Quinn one for £99 plus 50 vouchers you could collect for your shopping. Yeah.
You could rent them, but you couldn't have them.
Right.
No, a desk phone and a desk and a PC.
Right. And that was Bob Murray on his own, no employees, off you go.
Off you go.
Okay. Very good.
Or my first office really was my car, but
right. Yeah.
You know, in real terms, my first office was in Ainger Street.
Very good. So Hibernia it was 40 years of Hibernia, ups and downs, fantastic. At the end, Bob, how many people had you employed in Hibernia? And maybe tell us about a brief history of the journey of Hibernia.
Okay. It was a slightly different business proposition because a lot of the other computer companies were trying to sell computers, whereas what I was trying to do was help organizations adopt computers.
Nice.
And keep those computers operational and functional and providing a return on investment to the organizations.
Right.
So in hindsight, I kind of came at it from a service perspective.
Okay.
And from the outset, there was a service ethos within the organization, whereas most other computer suppliers didn't really get what service was about and just wanted to shift boxes.
Right.
In fact, it wasn't really my intention to get into the supply game, but I was working on a contract for one of my bigger clients at the time, and I had gotten 2 or 3 commitments as to when equipment was due to be delivered.
Right.
But I was let down on 2 or 3 occasions.
Right.
And the IT manager took me aside and said, look, we love the service you're providing. Why don't you supply the equipment as well? Because then at least you can be here at the right time.
Right. Very good.
And that's how it started.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. But even at the end, Evros what was the mixed services product? I mean, because box shifting now, hardware has become so cheap, margins are so tight. Would that have been 50% or 30% because service is where it is, or is it?
Yeah, well, we never lost the service ethos. Box shifting, the customer base grew, and the size of the customers grew as well, and our offering grew.
Right.
So box shifting continued to be critical from a revenue perspective.
Okay.
But we never lost that services ethos, and that was always our primary driver.
Right.
I think somehow it was in the DNA of the company.
Okay.
And I even see it in other organizations now, not just in the IT industry, but even in hospitality. You have to get service to be able to do it.
Absolutely.
If you don't get it, you can't pay it lip service.
Right.
And people see the difference between an organization that provides it well, and those who just try to do it.
Sure.
You know.
And Bob, you obviously couldn't do this all on your own. So at some stage, or at what stage did you strengthen the team, and were there key people brought in?
I in the early days, my focus was only on recruiting technical people,
right? Because
that was our offering.
Okay.
So I hired good engineers with good reputations, but then I found that I was being pushed into an office function. I didn't have any experience, but I had to become an accountant type person, a marketing type person.
HR.
Sometimes a receptionist. HR wasn't quite so critical in those days that it is today. but it had to be able to address all the requirements of growing business.
Okay.
And there were no, it's lovely today to see organizations such as, take Dog Patch Labs, for example, where they'll incubate a business
Right.
and help the founders address all those kind of peripheral issues
Sure.
that need to be addressed to get an organization up and going.
But yet allow the founders concentrate on what they're best
On
at,
what they're good at.
and building the business.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So I found over time then you have to make a conscious decision. Well, am I going to be the person helping run the business or running the business, or am I going to be the person out servicing the computers to
Sure.
keep them operational?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately in some regards, I enjoyed providing the service,
Right.
helping the customer, meeting the customer,
Mm.
but I had to focus on keeping the train on the tracks.
Very good. Good.
Mm.
So you brought a few key people in. How many years ago would that have been, or when did you first realise that Bob Murray can not do all this himself?
Well, you were very instrumental, Colin. I was lucky to meet you when the company was very embryonic, and I used to keep a cap on the number of people at about 20.
Right.
Because I felt that if I was going to go over 20 people, we might lose our focus.
Right.
Our focus might move towards trying to find customers to pay the wages.
Right.
It's a big eye-opener when you recruit your first employee and you
Yes.
realize that this employee has to earn a salary before I do.
Correct.
You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And that happens maybe for, certainly quite a few employees.
Yeah.
They all have to get paid before you
Absolutely.
get anything.
I found, Bob, and I think you're alluding to it, that you have a responsibility now, and your responsibility is to that employee,
Correct.
Before yourself.
They've put their trust in you, so
Correct.
you have to bring them along.
Sure.
And we were lucky. There was a demand for what we were providing, but I've seen companies over the years that they might set up and they might take on a couple of employees, and they're only running like a hamster in a hamster wheel,
Right.
just making ends meet,
Yeah.
and not making any profit
Sure.
at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's got to be soul destroying.
Remind me, Bob, how did we first meet?
How did we meet? That's
Yeah. 96 or 97?
yeah. There's a story behind that, Colin. I don't know if you know it all, actually.
Okay.
Maybe you do, or maybe you've forgotten. I said to you earlier on that I had to stop fixing computers and learn to be HR person or a marketing person or a finance person. When you do something like that, you always assume that, let's take finance, for example. You always assume that an accountant is better at accounts than
Yourself.
you doubt yourself.
Yeah.
If I bring in an accountant, they obviously know more about finance than I do. Well, in about 1994, 95, I brought in an accountant just to look through everything.
Right.
And he went into a room in the office and she dragged in all the binders, all the books. I think it was about autumn timeframe, September timeframe. And he came back out and he was straight-faced. He said to me, "I've only one piece of advice for you." I said, "What?" He said, "Shut it down.
Wow.
Shut down the business."
Right.
And I couldn't believe it.
Okay.
I said, "What?"
Yeah.
He said, "You can either shut it down now
Hmm.
and you'll have some money to do what needs to be done during a shutdown process,
Right.
or you can wait till Christmas and you'll be going out of business anyway, and it'll be a lot more painful for you."
Good God.
I was gobsmacked.
Right.
So I called a man in our auditors are in Limerick. Actually, it's on public record. It's BDO in Limerick
Absolutely.
for
Okay.
historical reasons.
Right.
And the head of audit down there at the time was a chap, Dennis Hanley was his name.
That's right.
Do you remember Dennis?
I do, yeah.
Great
Yeah.
character.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great character. And I rang BDO, and Dennis came on the phone, and Dennis could be very gruff. Okay, and he said, "What's this I hear?" I said, "Geez, Dennis, there's an accountant in here." And he says, "We're going out of business." He said, "Right, Collection Hotel, 1 hour, 30 minutes.
Right.
I'll be there.
Right.
I want to meet you." So I hopped in the car and I drove down. That's at the hotel in Portlaoise.
That's
isn't
right,
it?
yeah.
I drove down to Portlaoise and Dennis was there ahead of me with one of his colleagues, and they had the ballroom completely booked,
Right.
with one long table in the middle, covered in green baize, and a light hanging over. So it was like walking into an interrogation.
Okay.
And I walked in, and I sat down in front of Dennis, and he looked at me, and he said, "Are you or are you not going out of business?"
Okay.
And I said, "Well, I'm not a finance person, but I didn't think so. But the accountant says we are."
Yes. Yeah.
And I won't give you all the expletives he threw at me, but he said, "What's your gut instinct?
Okay.
That's all I want. I don't care whether you're qualified or not. What's your instinct?"
Right.
And I said, "My instinct is we're not."
Right.
And he said, "Right, I'll have somebody in your office tomorrow."
Okay.
And he knew you.
Very good.
And you came in.
That's
and we haven't looked back.
Yeah, I would have done some work with BDO Dublin at the time. That's how exactly how it came to be. Okay.
Yeah. What was that, 95?
95, 96, yeah. So I would have set out my own in 95. So maybe 96. So thank you very much, Bob, for that work at the time.
That's how we met. And we haven't looked back.
Not at all. Not at all. So over the years then, did you ever confide in anyone, or was there anyone that you ever went to for advice, or a mentor, or was there anyone that you admired in the industry that you said, "I want to be like them," or was it just driven yourself?
It's a good question. I think I was very much self-driven. I learned a great lesson from Dr. Wang. He was the man behind Wang Computers. I think he was a Chinese immigrant who came to America and set up the computer company.
Right.
He wrote in his autobiography at the end of his life, he said, I don't consider myself to be particularly brilliant or particularly clever. I just seem to have gotten by for longer than most people without shooting myself in the foot."
Okay.
And that was a great lesson.
Simple philosophy.
Well, some of the best things in life are simple.
Yeah.
And after that, we grew the business very much based on what our customers required, with that service ethos. And the customer who came to me and said, "Why don't you supply the equipment as well?" The PC was making huge inroads into customer sites effectively.
Right.
Gradually, the mini mainframes were starting to be moved out, and the PC was taking more and more. So then there were issues like networking and security. So we were working with the customer to experience where their next wall of pain was coming from.
Okay.
And could we, when we're recruiting our next engineer, make sure that they had skills in those areas?
Right.
So that rather than just sit with the customer and say, "We're only going to look after your PCs," we were working with them saying, "We will keep your PC fleet operational, and we will keep it providing return on investment. And whatever needs to go along with that, we work with you to try and make sure we have the skills to hit whatever demands are going to come across your desk."
Really interesting to hear your comments, Bob. The customer and service are key things you're saying there. And indeed, you reacted to what they needed and provided them with that, rather than trying to sell them or provide them something that you wanted to sell.
I saw it in Wang for a long time. Wang were very good at office automation, and I saw salespeople trying to sell huge computer systems that didn't really fit the customer requirements.
Right.
But once the deal was done, then the engineer was sent in to try and pick up the pieces and make that computer system fit what the customer needed to do.
Yeah.
And it was a painful process.
Sure.
But when we did get to the point where we were hiring salespeople, I used to try and say to them, "You don't have to be a salesperson in the traditional sense. You're not selling the customer anything they don't want or need. You just need to be there for them when they pick up the phone to call you.
Yeah.
And if you can do that and keep looking after the customer, the customer will look after you.
Yeah, and keep coming back to you.
They do. Now, don't get me wrong, Colin. I'm sure you see this in your business. There will be clients who will see you as an asset to their organization.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful working relationship.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there are clients who'll see you as a supplier.
Correct.
To be beaten and kicked and taken advantage of at every opportunity, or squeezed.
Yes. Yeah.
And regardless of whether you don't win or you do win the business, the relationship doesn't work as well, and everybody suffers.
Yeah.
So we've focused on working with customers that appreciate what we did, and we work really hard for them.
So it's a relationship is a key thing.
It's very much a relationship.
It's a two-way street. Very good.
Yeah. So.
Jerry, ask you, your first customer, are they still around? Are they still a customer? Or even in the first 10? Personally, I still have the very first client. He's still a client. 28 years on, like, you know.
Yeah, they are. They're still a client.
Okay.
And you know what? They were a company I met when I worked for Wang. So I always actually, they were the very last email I sent when I signed off from Hibernia, or Evros as it was at the time. I met them when I was a junior engineer in Wang in 1984.
Right.
And when we did the deal with Air in 2001, just before I signed off the systems, I sent them an email saying
2021.
Or sorry, 2021.
That's okay. Yeah.
I just thanking them for all their assistance and support over the years.
Yeah, it's very good.
Lovely organisation.
Yeah. No, it's lovely to have loyalty there. Loyalty is very important to me, and I think it's great to see.
It's important in business, you know, I was looking at a LinkedIn post yesterday. The other thing that's important is trust. And one of the people I'm connected on LinkedIn broke down the elements of trust. Nice. You know, how you trust people in different ways, and you know, the different aspects of trust. And I replied to him and said, today it's very challenging.
Sure.
Because we're going a wee bit off topic, but people are fed false information, and they're not given the facts.
Yes. Yeah.
And it almost gets to the point where people are starting to not trust their own decisions.
Right.
And that's got to be very challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? So it's endemic on the individual to try and educate themselves as much as possible.
Right.
In various aspects of what they're looking at.
Right.
But there's a lot of work involved in that.
No.
If you follow one line of thought, you're going to disconnect from the other bunch of people out there.
So sitting here about 40 years on, the ups and the downs, and building Hibernia Evros to what it became, was funding ever an issue, or did you take in equity, or were you ever approached by VCs, or was that ever on the horizon?
Well, in the early days, we were lucky that we always operated in the black.
Okay.
I do have a couple of letters. I'm not sure whether I should say this or not, but you know them. I have a couple of letters on my desk because in 1990, although I was operating in the black, I went to the bank and I said I'd like an overdraft facility.
Right.
Just so as I wouldn't mistime a lodgement against a check.
Sure.
I didn't want to bounce a check.
And back in the day, Bob, checks took 7 days to clear.
No, it was tricky.
Absolutely.
There was no online banking or anything like
Not
that.
At all.
So the bank manager I met, he put me through the ringer.
Right.
And eventually he said, we'll put in an application for 500 punts, it was at the time.
Right.
And I said, well, look, I have a lodgement. Would you take the lodgement and lodge it? Because I think I've written a check that's going to go below the zero line.
Okay.
And I wouldn't like to bounce it.
Yeah.
A few days later, I got two letters through the door. The first letter, I opened it and said, your request for overdraft facility has been declined. And the second letter, I opened it and said, your check has been referred to drawer.
Not good.
Not great, but it was an eye opener at the time that I needed to depend on my own resources.
Okay.
And not be in that position under different circumstances.
Right.
So we were fortunate that for a long time, the company operated in the black.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. So you never took in private equity, or never?
Never took in private equity. In the latter years of the business, we had an invoice discounting facility.
Fine.
When we were on an M&A type trail.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Very good. So Evros was 30 years old as you exited. What's been the biggest lessons you've learned from developing the company?
The thing that keeps coming back to me, Colin, we can talk about learning lessons about technology and all that, but that's somewhat crass. But the thing that comes back to me time and time again is the people, the importance of people and working with people. Now, we talked about the first employee, that you almost become you're responsible for them.
Sure.
But having been there 20 or 30 years, you know, we used to get in young people that might have been 19 or 20 or 21. And I used to feel we were almost extensions of their parents, that they were starting out in their career, and we had to help them nurture that, or even, decide. We'd one chap at one stage, we felt he'd made a wrong career move and the IT industry wasn't for him.
Right.
So we worked with him.
Right.
It turned out he wanted to be a teacher.
Okay.
His dad was a teacher, and we worked with him, and we helped him get back on the path where he could go and study to be a teacher.
So it may not have been good for Hibernia or Evros, but it was good for that person.
It was the right thing for him.
Yeah.
And life is short, you got to look out for the people, and be careful of the people you meet on the way up the ladder, because you're going to meet them all again on the way back down.
And look, I see in our industry, a person who has a passion and an aptitude for figures, the qualifications don't matter. They do to some degree. They must have some technical knowledge, but essentially, if that's your calling, you'll be 10 times better than the person who it's not their calling.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the qualifications, they give you a level of credibility. They get you in the door.
Absolutely, yeah.
But if you can't do the job, or if the job is not for you, you're going to kill yourself trying to do it.
Yeah,
and that doesn't work for anyone.
So, Bob, I'm sure you don't have to work again, but you're relatively young by today's standards. What's next for Bob Murray? Are you going to pastures and play golf?
No, I'm not going to play golf, Colin. No, I'll work on something. I went back to college. I went back to the IMI in the last few years, and I wanted to study to do an MBA. One of the diplomas I did was in executive coaching.
Okay.
And executive coaching, I had a bit of a misunderstanding of what it was about when I went into the course.
Right.
But it's about working with people to bring out the best in them.
Right.
Now, you could say to me, but Bob, you can't coach me on finance, because I know far more about finance than you'll ever know. But you'd be wrong, because I can.
Sorry, I'd actually question that, but go on.
I can, because the chances are that the question on your mind, you already have the answer to it. And my responsibility is to help you arrive at the answer you already have by getting rid of all the doubts or the things that are in the way of it emerging. And that's what an executive coach will do. So they'll work with you to try and bring out the best of your capabilities.
Right. So has that become a commercial entity for you yet, or is it just currently you're researching and waiting to see? Because I'd love to sign up for the coaching program if it's available.
It's funny, Colin. I'm quite passionate about it and bringing out the best in people.
Right.
It's a bit like my hobby is photography when I get a chance to do it.
Okay.
And people have said to me over the years, why don't you go professional and start doing weddings and stuff like that? And I've always had the same answer. I said, if I charge people for it, I won't enjoy it as much. And the coaching is similar. I want to do it for people who can't afford to pay for it.
Okay.
I want to help those people.
Very good.
I don't want to help the senior execs. Well, I'm happy to help the senior execs, but I don't want to earn anything out of it. Okay. I want to find a way of helping the people who can't afford it.
Very good. And again, personally, Bob, in my game, I really get a kick out of meeting a 20 to 25-year-old person who's a real passion, good idea, very naive in business, brilliant at what they do. And I'd like to think that we help and support and nurture them along the way to become successful at their business. And I really enjoy that as well. The money is secondary. I think to see a person develop and succeed has been great. So perhaps we're on the one path there.
Well, I think, Colin, that's why we've known each other for so long, because before I came out here this morning, I was thinking about it, and people would say, why do you deal with Colin Whelan and Guardian Management? Okay. And I'd say the same thing I said to a bank manager years ago. I will give you my business if I think you're as interested in my business as I am.
Very good.
That you're not here for your business only. Yeah. I respect the fact that you have to be here to some degree for your business. That's life. Yeah. Every man in the process needs to make a living.
Sure.
But if I reach a point where I feel you're only here for your business and not for mine, well, then our relationship would fall apart.
Correct. Yeah.
And you came in with that many, many years ago.
Right.
You and I can still pick up the phone to you, Colin, and say, hey, listen, I'm having a problem with such and such.
Yeah.
And you'll do what you can to find a solution.
Even if it's only to buy a new car, Bob. What should I buy?
Yeah.
So photography, is that taking up a lot of your time, or is it not enough time for you?
It's not taking up as much time as I would like it to take up, Colin. I do take the camera out now and again, but I just need to take it out more.
Right. Very good. You're not going to part this world by any means in the next couple of years, please God. But if you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be so far?
Oh, I'd like to think that the bulk of the people that I came across as I went about my business and my career might look back and say, yeah,
that was a good
dealings I had were largely positive.
Very good.
Yeah. Now, if there's anybody listening or watching this, they're probably going to be ringing me up saying, hang on.
Yeah.
My experience wasn't so positive. Can we revisit?
Sure. But overall, I would agree with you, Bob, from knowing a number of people who have worked with you over the years. And going back to that, is there anybody still with Evros who was there on day one or the first year or 2 years?
I can think of 3 people who are still there that would have been with me over 20 years.
Okay.
We can talk about loyalty.
Sure.
And loyalty should be rewarded.
Very good.
And certainly one individual who's, he's been with the company 25 years or so.
Right.
And a really key part of the business as well, from being so well regarded by his colleagues, and just being very loyal to the organization, and being there when the chips are down.
Right.
And I'm happy to say he's still there.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of the finances, but you successfully completed the sale in late 21, early 22. And that was a nice exit for a number of people. Were you able to look after a number of those key staff, or what was the thoughts among the shareholders at that point?
No, it was very important to us that people were looked after when we left.
Good.
You know what? No organization exists without all the people.
Sure.
You can put the best management team in the world in place, and if the people are not there, the management team is of no use whatsoever.
Right.
I'd like to think that the employees are well looked after.
Good to hear.
So,
good to hear.
Fingers crossed.
So
they're all happy.
Sitting here now and looking back, which I think is scary myself often, but if you were looking at your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself now?
Trust the process. Go with the flow.
Right.
I had an interesting conversation with a chap who was roughly that age only a few years ago. I think it was in the office actually. And I said, we're all dealt a certain amount of opportunities, but only some of us are going to reach out and grab onto them.
Okay.
The opportunities will come your way. Don't let them all go by.
Right.
Trust the process and trust yourself as well.
I think that requires a huge leap of faith though, Bob, in that you mentioned an employee earlier on there, or a colleague who was married with a mortgage and kids, and they had financial commitments, and it can be difficult to make the leap of faith that I can succeed. Personally, I needed £3,000 per month to pay the bills. I had 3,000 of savings, 3,000 of redundancy, 3,000 of my first job coming in. I said, I have 3 months runway here. I made the jump, but never looked back. But it's making the leap of faith.
Making the leap. But you know what? For the first 10 years, I didn't get a holiday.
Okay.
And it's hard work.
Okay.
So if you're going to make that leap, make sure you're leaping towards something that you're going to enjoy doing.
Sure.
Because you're going to do it for an awful long
Maybe
time.
I shouldn't have taken the holidays so in the first couple of years.
I look at you, Colin. You look like you're half my age.
Sure. That's it. Well, look, Bob Murray, thank you very much. Thoroughly enjoyed.
Lovely to meet you, Colin, as
too.
ever.
Cheers.
Thank you.
If you want to learn a little more about Guardian, you can go to guardianaccountants.ie, where you'll learn about everything that we can do. If you're enjoying the Guardian Irish Business podcast, Please do share it with your friends and colleagues, and don't forget to subscribe, like and review wherever you are listening. Thanks for listening. Until next time.